Yay, they made something better than Shyamalan's movie. Like that means anything. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, and I knew nothing could be better than the original cartoon. I mean, Avatar The Last Airbender isn't just one of the best animated shows of all time, it's one of the best shows of all time, period. It's hard to talk about the new Netflix adaptation without mentioning how much of a fanboy of the old show I am, and how big of a bias I have when reviewing the new show, as if that was hard to guess, but I still think that this wasn't the live action version of this story that we were looking for. A lot of it felt off, whether it be characterization, narrative decisions, or deliberate changes from the source material. I just didn't enjoy what the filmmakers chose to do. I'll get into the spoiler-involved specifics later, but for now, I'll say that because of how influential the original show was, I understand how the writers would want to shuffle some things around, but those changes seem to be only for convenience, not to increase drama or tension. The best thing about the show, by far, was the special effects and overall production, which were really top-notch. The show started out by showing some incredibly cool earthbending that felt fast and dangerous, which was put in just to prove that this would be better than the film from 2010. Yet the bending and effects didn't hit all the time. Let's just say whenever Aang or someone else was replaced with a CG double, I could tell. But once the camera panned out, it all looked good. Aside from the obvious answer, money, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why this series was made, though I am glad it was. I'll save a full discussion on whether or not live-action adaptations deserve to be made regardless of quality for its own video, but for now, I'll say that the dynamic action and camera work that replicates an anime style is more than possible in live action, but wasn't executed properly in this show. So aside from those overwhelmingly negative thoughts, and another couple wild decisions that I'll cover later, I thought this adaptation was good enough. And I definitely want this to get a second season, if only to tell the continued adventures of this show, but handled better. Though that may be only because I want to see Toph. I'd say check it out, but if you're that interested in this story and you haven't seen the original animated show, just check that out. It'll be a much better experience. But now I'm going to talk spoilers, and that includes all 3 seasons of the original show, so be warned. From here on out, I'm spoiling everything. There's a cold open with really cool bending that I talked about earlier, but that earthbender is caught and burned alive by Sozin, which is awesome to see and a real shock because I thought this was going to be a kid show. I mean, I guess it still could be, but it's not. I had such high hopes from just that scene alone. It felt serious, but not too self-serious. Sozin ending the cold open with him declaring he would kill all of the airbenders had so much weight behind it, giving me chills. It's a bit of a weird choice, the first of many, this being a property that is supposed to be aimed at children, but again, maybe not this time. But I can't deny how awesome it was to see. Going in, and even after a few episodes, I had the viewpoint that they had to give less screen time to some of the characters simply because they had to. But then, I did the math. In watch time alone, there are only 50 minutes or 3 episodes more in the cartoon, giving plenty of time to do pretty much everything that's in the original. But no, that's not what's in the new adaptation. They somehow covered significantly less while also slowing all of that down to a crawling pace. And it would make sense if they wanted to add dramatic tension to some of these events, but that isn't done at all. We were never going to feel any tension as far as if these characters are going to die, but at least add something more. Something about how everyone doesn't agree with each other, aside from Sokka and Katara hating one another, which is completely natural for siblings. The best example I can think of for not maximizing the drama was the climactic ending. When Aang becomes a big water fish kaiju, which is awesome that they did that, by the way. I mean, they had to do it, but it was still jaw-dropping. Yet when the music swells as Aang's doing his cool water Godzilla bending stuff with the help of the ocean spirit, they don't let the moment breathe at all. Immediately, Sokka and Yue have to explain what is going on so the filmmakers know the audience isn't lost. We get it, you don't have to explain. But I should probably go back to the beginning of the show, because after the amazing cold open, we move on to a scene with Aang's past. It's not horrible, but his falling with style sure didn't warm me up for anything fantastic. Chronologically, it makes sense to see this early on, but I still wish it was held for later. Maybe it could have been used as some sort of narrative reveal. Yet, following some nice dialogue with Gyatso, we actually see the siege of the Air Temple. As tragic as it was, seeing the airbending masters do their thing was really captivating to watch. It being so close to when Aang disappeared was really interesting too, him being just out of the line of danger. But that aspect was the first big sign that I wouldn't be happy with this adaptation. Maybe all of this should have been shown later on rather than straight off, but the biggest problem with this intro is the fact that Aang didn't run away. I wouldn't have had a problem with anything involved with the choices behind showing all of this as long as Aang ran away from his problems knowingly, instead of going on a nighttime jaunt. And that was only the start of what would end up as a forgettable interpretation of Aang. After 8 long episodes of watching him make decision after decision, I still don't know who Aang is. They make a point of saying he needs to understand who he is as a person, and they never resolve that past him needing to be the Avatar and what that means. Aang tells the audience multiple times that he's just a kid who wants to have fun, but I don't believe that. He only sidetracks the mission once, and that's to check out a burned forest. And the only reason he does that is so the story can include Heibai in the spiritual world, a storyline that was necessary but could have easily been incorporated smoother. Aside from the protagonist, we meet a bunch of new characters over the course of the show, and the majority of them are likable, but too many of them are mischaracterized. Sokka and Katara are copied from the show relatively well, but they only feel like just that, copies. And sometimes they are nothing but hollow copies. Katara was the worst example of this, not having any fire to her personality in the slightest. She kind of just camouflages into the background most of the time, rather than being at the forefront like she's supposed to be. She should be passionate, stubborn, and hypocritical. 3 traits I saw none of in the Netflix adaptation. She does end up fighting the waterbending master at the end, but even that felt flat. The fight itself will come up again later in this video because it is pretty cool, but the message behind it was shockingly dull when you think about how Katara was fighting institutional sexism. The other main characters weren't bad, but like everything else, it clearly should have been better, but I was taken completely out of the show when we met Bumi. While King Bumi's anger towards Aang and the fact that he disappeared when the world needed him most was understandable, but everything else about him felt off. Similar to how Harry Potter fans didn't love the old cinematic Dumbledores, I was looking for something whimsical, someone with a twinkle in his eye. Sure, he can and should be dangerous, but that's only when he needs to be. I could be more angry about how Aang didn't have to do any trials, but the worst of that for me was when they set up their fight. Bumi kinda just says, let's fight, rather than Aang underestimating him and choosing him as a challenger for a gladiator match. And speaking of that, why did they just outright say that the king was Bumi? I get everyone would immediately guess that that was his identity, but that should be the case. The whole idea about Bumi is that he's always playing games. Another character that took me right out of the show was Zhao. Everything behind the writing and acting was good, but there was a mistake made with him very early on, and that was the casting itself. The actor does a good job at playing this manic genius who is one step away from madness, but he's just not intimidating at all. But I could talk about how everyone was mischaracterized all day, so I'll say something positive before I move on. As always, it is a joy to see Iroh. His joke about Zuko needing tact, empathy, but most importantly, sticky rice, did a really good job of enduring me to this new version of one of the most beloved characters in all of fiction. As always, he could have been more wise and whimsical, but the actor did a fantastic job with what he was given. But other than the characterization being off a lot of the time, there are a lot of little notes that they easily could have added to make us care for the people in this show. Things like Zuko thinking the Avatar would be over 100 when he's first looking for him, which is funny but also really not, because it makes you think about how Zuko's been obsessing over this for 3 years. The shuffling around of storylines wasn't terrible, but 90% of the time it wasn't for the better. The one time I thought moving things around worked was when they combined Jet's Extremist story and the Mechanist Fire Nation Rat story. I thought those two fit together like puzzle pieces always meant to be. But even with that, the execution wasn't there. That particular narrative may have fallen flat for me only because there wasn't enough weight behind the reveal that Sai, the Mechanist, was working for the enemy, but that was the one time I thought the narrative shuffle kind of worked. I knew nothing else would be good when Katara just found the waterbending scroll in her bag. It makes sense that Gran would give it to her as a gift, but by not stealing it from those pirates, we'll never get to see Katara displaying her hypocrisy, and we'll never get to see those pirates. Before I get to my next topic, I'll mention the secret tunnels under Omashu. Other than the fact that this should be in Season 2, making it Sokka and Katara was an unhinged decision. I understand that there's love between a brother and a sister, but the entire time I was looking at them and praying we weren't going to get a Luke and Leia moment. But now that I've gotten all the boring stuff about characterization and themes out of the way, let's talk about the bending and the action. Because when it hit, it hit. A handful of the fights were genuinely incredible. Katara versus the waterbending master and Zuko at the end, Aang versus Zuko in the market, and the Fire Lord's duel with Zuko were all really great to look at. The choreography, effects, and camera work were all engaging for those sequences, but that was it. Except let's slow down a bit, because Zuko should not have fought his father. They definitely should have a duel, but in the original show, Zuko refuses to attack his dad at that moment, and because of his perceived mercy, that's why he's given his scar. His sometimes subconscious moral code conflicting with the respect he has for his father is what got him there in the first place. But by showing less, we got more of a sense of that in the cartoon, rather than the extended fight sequence we got in the Netflix adaptation. Again, the fight was cool to look at, but the entire decision to have it was wrong. The rest of the fights end up much less engaging, however. They felt very Pokemon rules, where one person does something, then the other does something back, over and over, back and forth until someone wins. The CG attacks they throw at each other look cool, but they need to be a bit more intricate. However, all of the flashy bending stuff is overshadowed by one giant flaw that frankly ruined the show for me. That is, Aang doesn't learn any new bending. He should be learning water bending early on, and there's a moment where Katara offers to help him learn, but he doesn't. And that moment isn't added for him to learn not to run away from his destiny. He just doesn't waterbend. It would have been cool to see him incorporate the new abilities and elements he's acquired along the way, especially in fights, proving that those new abilities have become reflexes of his, but we see none of it. He even waterbends in the terrible movie. At least I'm pretty sure Aang waterbends in the Shyamalan film. I mean, I'm not watching that again to check though. I already took 2 hours off of my life when I watched that. But even in that, they understood the audience came to see someone bend multiple elements at once. They understood that that's cool. Maybe I'm being too harsh and maybe I'm comparing it too much to the original animation, but this clearly should have been better. I'm not asking for a shot-for-shot remake of what we've had before, but if you're not going to be faithful to the characters and the narrative of the source material, why make it at all? A lot of this video kind of just became, look at this moment that was done better in the original show, so I'm sorry if you're not into that, but also I'm not sorry. This was cathartic to talk about, and I really hope someone working on the new show sees this so they can make something better next time. Unlike the recent Percy Jackson show, which I knew would get a second season, I'm not sure if we're going to see these characters again. I wish that wasn't the case, but this adaptation was just too much of a disappointment to warrant more. But despite that, I still need to see more, because like I said before, this was good enough. Thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.